The Nevada night pressed in with a merciless cold, the sort that seeped through walls, floors, and bones. Olivia Sanders had long since given up on sleep, drifting instead from window to window of the ranch house she'd called home since she was a child. Her parents were gone now, their laughter replaced by silence and snow, and every sound in the darkness set her nerves on edge. She poured herself another mug of coffee, strong, bitter, just the way her father liked it, and tried to focus on tomorrow's chores. Cattle needed water, pipes threatened to freeze, and hay bales wouldn't move themselves. She wrapped a faded flannel around her shoulders and forced herself to sit at the kitchen table, pushing away thoughts of what might be lurking out in the fields. Then, out of nowhere, a shrill, frantic whinny tore through the night, sharp, wild, and unlike anything she'd ever heard. It wasn't her horses. No, this was a voice from the wild, a Mustang, desperate, not calling to others but crying out for help. Olivia's heart jumped. She reached for her boots, cursing softly as she jammed her feet in, grabbed her father's old flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch. The snow was thick, blowing sideways in gusts that rattled the windows and stung her cheeks. Yet she pressed on, drawn by the urgency in that wild voice. At the fence line, the beam of her flashlight caught movement. A massive, slate-gray stallion stood outlined against the white, muscles taut, mane whipping in the wind. Olivia recognized him instantly. Locals called him Spirit, a legend among the Mustang herds. He was known for his caution, his pride, and his absolute refusal to let humans get close. Tonight, though, Spirit was nothing like the stories. He pawed the ground, tossing his head, nostrils flaring. When their eyes met, Olivia felt a jolt of fear, and something else, too, a wordless plea so intense it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. She hesitated, instinct warning her that approaching a wild stallion at night was reckless at best. But Spirit did the impossible. He stepped forward, closer to her, shivering in the cold, letting out another broken whinny that sounded almost like a command. Olivia felt her training rise up within her, the semesters at veterinary school, the hours spent calming frightened animals, the way her mother had taught her to read the silent language of horses. She retreated just long enough to grab her old vet bag from the mudroom, stuffing it with bandages, gloves, a flashlight, a faded blanket, and whatever supplies she could grab with shaking hands. She returned to the fence, swallowing her fear. Spirit danced nervously, turning, glancing over his shoulder at the darkness beyond. Then he paused, watching her expectantly. Olivia lifted the latch and slipped through, boots crunching on the frozen ground. The stallion waited just long enough for her to catch up, then took off at a brisk trot, looking back often to make sure she followed. The cold was biting, cutting through her layers like knives. Olivia's breath came in ragged puffs. She stumbled more than once, her flashlight barely piercing the swirling snow. Every shadow seemed to hide danger. Wolves, coyotes, the unknown. But Spirit was tireless, urging her forward, his anxiety mounting with every step. Olivia's doubts warred with her instincts. What was she doing? She could barely see. Her hands were going numb, and if she got lost out here, no one would know until morning. But something about Spirit's urgency kept her going. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Spirit stopped at the edge of a narrow ravine. He snorted, stamping his hooves, and looked at her, then down the embankment. Olivia braced herself and scrambled after him. There, in a hollow shielded from the wind, she found the source of Spirit's panic. A wild mare lay in the snow, her sides heaving, eyes rolling with pain. Even in the dim light, Olivia could see she was in trouble. Labor had come, but something was wrong. The mare, jet black with a white blaze, was Spirit's mate, known as Shadow among the locals who watched the herds. Olivia knelt beside Shadow, talking softly to calm her own nerves as much as the mare's. The scene was chaos. Spirit paced in circles, snorting anxiously, the snow falling faster, the temperature dropping. Olivia's hands shook as she rummaged through her bag, trying to remember every lesson she'd ever learned about equine births gone wrong. She realized quickly, breech birth, the foal was turned the wrong way, and without help both mother and child would die. She fought to control her panic. She called out to Spirit, half expecting him to bolt, but the stallion stayed close, his trust unwavering. Olivia's fingers worked in the dim light, coaxing, guiding, every nerve on edge. Shadow's pain was raw, her cries echoing in Olivia's bones. For a terrifying moment, Olivia thought she was losing them both. Then, finally, with one last desperate effort, she felt the foal shift. Moments later, a tiny, shivering filly slid free, landing in the snow with a gasp. Olivia barely had time to breathe before she stripped off her jacket, wrapping the newborn, rubbing her briskly, praying for breath. And then, a small, weak nicker. Shadow nosed her foal, relief and exhaustion mingling in her eyes. Spirit stepped forward, trembling, and nuzzled Olivia, a gesture so gentle and grateful, it nearly brought her to tears. In that fragile, fleeting moment, Olivia knew everything had changed. She had crossed a line, stepping into a wild world, and there would be no turning back. The world outside Olivia's ranch had never felt so alien. Snow swirling, time warping, every second stretched to a lifetime as she crouched beside the exhausted mare and her shivering newborn filly. Olivia's hands ached from cold and effort. She pressed her palms to Shadow's steaming side, feeling the mare's heart hammer against her ribs, her breathing ragged and shallow. The filly, slick with afterbirth, barely moved at first, and Olivia's heart threatened to crack open with fear. Out here there were no guarantees. Even the strongest could be lost to winter in a heartbeat. But there was no time for panic. Olivia worked on autopilot, hearing her old professor's voice in her head, calm and insistent. Keep the mother warm, stimulate the foal, clear the airway, time is everything. She knelt, rubbing the filly with the inside of her jacket, using the rough flannel to coax life into the trembling little body. Her own breath came out in clouds, lips numb, every finger stinging. "Come on, breathe, kid," she whispered, not even sure who she was talking to anymore, herself, the foal, or the wild night. Spirit, the stallion, hovered so close that Olivia could feel his body heat radiate through her back. Any other time, she would have been terrified, but now she drew strength from his presence. Spirit's eyes burned with a kind of wild intelligence, watching, waiting, trusting her with everything he held dear. He nickered, low and urgent, his massive head lowering to nudge the filly. The touch jolted the foal, her legs kicked weakly, and a wet cough rattled in her tiny throat. Olivia quickly cleared the mouth and nose. At last, the newborn sucked in a shuddering breath. It was a fragile miracle. Olivia let herself exhale, trembling with relief. Shadow lifted her head, fighting exhaustion, and began licking her foal clean, nudging her upright with the gentlest of encouragements. The filly wobbled, collapsed, then tried again. Olivia marveled at the sheer will in such a small, wild creature, no bigger than a large dog, yet carrying the stubborn blood of her ancestors. But the danger wasn't over. The wind was picking up, the temperature dropping. Olivia had to think fast. The filly was alive, but barely. Shadow needed warmth, rest, and water. If she left them, the cold could take them both before dawn. If she lingered too long, Olivia herself might not make it back. She cursed the limits of her old vet bag. No IVs, no heat packs, no shelter, but the low brush and snow-laden trees around the ravine. Still, she was a Sanders. Her mother had taught her to make do with less, to trust her instincts. Olivia rummaged through her supplies, pulling out a faded emergency blanket, tucking it around the foal, then wrapping Shadow's neck in her own scarf. She scooped handfuls of snow, letting it melt in her cupped hands to give Shadow a sip of water, murmuring softly to keep herself and the horses from panicking. Spirit stayed close, his presence anchoring them all. For a tense hour, Olivia worked with a desperate calm, checking vital signs, monitoring breathing, keeping the filly moving. Every so often, she glanced up, scanning the shadows for predators. Wolves were rare but not unheard of, and even coyotes could be bold in this kind of winter. The woods felt alive, every snapping branch and shifting shadow a threat. Gradually, the filly rallied. With Olivia's help, she managed to stand, wobbly, legs splaying, but upright. Shadow nickered in encouragement, nuzzling her daughter. Spirit let out a soft, shuddering sigh, his body relaxing just a fraction. Olivia let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe, they would all make it. Then came a fresh wave of panic, headlights in the distance, bobbing through the trees. For one wild heartbeat, Olivia thought it might be help, a neighbor maybe. But the lights moved too quickly, sweeping wide beams over the snow, and then faded as suddenly as they appeared. Her heart hammered. What if someone had heard Spirit's cries and come to investigate? What if they found Olivia, a known Mustang sympathizer, kneeling beside wild horses with her vet bag open? The law in Nevada was clear. Wild horses were protected, but interfering, especially on federal land, could mean fines or worse. Olivia pressed her lips together, realizing how exposed she was. She finished tending Shadow, then collected her things, careful not to leave any trace of herself behind. But before she could leave, Spirit blocked her path. The stallion planted himself between Olivia and the way home, his eyes locking with hers. He wasn't threatening. If anything, his posture was pleading, almost desperate. For a moment, Olivia saw not just a wild horse, but a father, terrified for his family. She reached out, hesitated, then placed a gloved hand on his neck. "I'll come back," she whispered, voice raw. "I promise." Spirit's body shook, but he stepped aside. Olivia trudged back through the snow, every muscle screaming. By the time she reached the ranch house, the sky was bleeding with the first light of dawn. She stumbled inside, stripped off her soaked clothes, and slumped at the kitchen table, staring at her trembling hands. She should have felt triumphant. She'd saved a life. Maybe two. But all she felt was fear. She had crossed a line between human and wild, and she didn't know if she, or the horses, would be safe because of it. But when she looked out the frosted window, Olivia saw Spirit standing at the fence watching her, the first rays of sun catching in his mane. Something had changed, irreversibly. For better or worse, their lives were now bound together by the wild and the night. And somewhere in the snow-covered ravine, a new life, small, fragile, and unbroken, blinked at the dawn. Dawn brought a cautious peace to the ranch. Olivia stood at her kitchen window, steaming mug in hand, gaze fixed on the snowy field beyond her fence. Spirit was gone. No sign of the legendary stallion but for a line of hoofprints trailing into the woods. Part of her longed to slip back beneath the covers, let exhaustion swallow her whole. But she couldn't. Her mind raced with worry for Shadow and the filly, and for the first time in months, her heart beat with something else, a sense of purpose she'd nearly forgotten. The chores could wait. Olivia pulled on her thickest coat, layered flannel and thermal beneath, and stepped out into the cold. She filled a battered bucket with warm water, packed a few carrots, and grabbed a bundle of alfalfa hay. It wasn't much, but it was what she could spare. Following Spirit's trail, Olivia moved slowly and quietly, keeping her head low, ears straining for any sound out of place. She found them just after sunrise, in a patch of sunlight at the edge of the ravine. Shadow stood, her legs trembling, sides drawn tight but breathing easier than the night before. The filly, a smoky little slip of a thing with a splash of white down her nose, stood unsteadily beside her mother, blinking at the bright new world. Spirit kept his distance, watching Olivia warily from a stand of juniper trees. Olivia didn't approach. She set the bucket and hay at the edge of the clearing, then backed away, heart pounding. She didn't want to frighten them, didn't want to break the fragile trust that had formed in the chaos of last night. Instead, she sat on a downed log and took out her old notebook, its cover battered from years of use. She started to document everything she could: time, temperature, the horse's condition, even small details like the filly's first steps. She snapped a few photos with her phone, zooming in from a safe distance. As she watched, Shadow nudged her foal toward the hay. The filly sniffed at it, nibbled, then sneezed and went back to nursing. Spirit circled closer, not threatening but alert, never taking his eyes off Olivia. She found herself whispering thanks to him for trusting her. In the quiet, it struck Olivia how close she'd come to losing all three of them, how a few desperate decisions had drawn a line connecting her to these wild lives. That day, and in the days that followed, Olivia developed a careful rhythm. She'd check on the Mustangs at first light, always keeping her distance, leaving food and water, scribbling notes and taking pictures. She watched the filly, whom she began to think of as Nova, grow stronger, wobbling less, her coat growing glossier with each passing day. She watched Shadow's eyes regain their light, and she watched Spirit, ever the sentinel, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, but still wild, still untamed. Back in her ranch house, Olivia filled pages with observations, but her mind wandered, haunted by old regrets. She thought of the day she left veterinary school, too overwhelmed by her father's passing and the weight of the ranch. She wondered if she'd made the right choice, if she was wasting the gifts her parents and professors had nurtured in her. The ranch was lonely. Neighbors were miles away, nights were silent, and the only company she had was the ticking of the old kitchen clock and the wind rattling the roof. One evening, as the sun burned orange over the horizon, Olivia heard a truck rumble up her drive. Two men from neighboring ranches, Pete Dalton and Carl Henley, climbed out, hats pulled low against the wind. They leaned on the gate, watching her with the wary friendliness of men used to bad news. "Heard you've been out past the fence line a lot lately," Pete said, voice casual but pointed. Olivia nodded, keeping her tone neutral. "Just checking on some strays." Carl spat into the snow. "Wild horses aren't your business, Olivia. You know the county rules. Mess with them, you're asking for trouble." Pete's face softened. "We're just looking out for you. Last thing you need is the feds poking around, making life harder." Olivia thanked them, promising to be careful, but their words lingered. Later, she got a visit from Lisa Marston, the county animal control officer. Lisa wore her badge with a weary pride and made it clear she'd heard the rumors. "Don't interfere, Liv," she said. "It's not just a fine. They can take your stock, your land. I'd hate to see that happen." Olivia promised she'd keep her distance, but deep down, she knew she wouldn't. What she'd witnessed with Spirit, Shadow, and Nova had changed her. She couldn't turn her back now. The guilt and self-doubt she'd carried for years started to fade, replaced by a stubborn resolve. For the first time since losing her parents, Olivia felt alive again, purposeful, connected to something wild and good. Each morning, she watched for the Mustangs, documenting Nova's progress, Shadow's recovery, Spirit's growing trust. Sometimes, when she left the clearing, she'd find Spirit waiting by the fence as she returned home, watching her with calm, dark eyes. They had become each other's sentinels, bound by one impossible night. On the rare occasions she went into town, Olivia noticed a subtle shift. Some folks offered warm smiles, others glared, muttering about that Sanders woman and her horse obsession. She let them talk. She was done hiding her heart. One evening, as she sat by her window, scribbling in her notebook, Olivia realized she'd stumbled onto something bigger than herself. The loneliness of ranch life was still there, but now it was colored with hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be, with wild horses and a story only she could tell. Olivia's days settled into a new rhythm as winter began to thaw, the Nevada sun glinting off melting snowdrifts and turning the pastures into fields of gleaming ice. Each morning, she made her rounds with cautious optimism, searching the horizon for any sign of Spirit, Shadow, and little Nova. The trio became frequent visitors, sometimes mere silhouettes against the early light, sometimes bold shapes grazing at the edge of her land. Each encounter fueled something restless inside Olivia, a dream that tugged at her even in sleep. But it was the stillness of her ranch at night that made her dreams sharpest. Alone in the farmhouse, Olivia would pore over her scribbled notes and blurry phone photos, piecing together the details of Nova's growth and Shadow's recovery. With every observation, a vision formed. What if there was a safe place for these Mustangs, where the law protected them and their wild spirit remained unbroken? What if the ranch could become more than a home for cattle and memories? That question drove Olivia to her old laptop, where she began her research. Nevada law was a tangle of regulations. Wild horses belonged to the public, managed by the Bureau of Land Management, with strict rules against private interference. Ranchers had lost land or faced prosecution for less than she'd done. Yet there were loopholes, provisions for sanctuary, legal foster care, and rehabilitation in cases of injury or distress. Olivia read late into the night, scribbling down statutes, making lists of what she would need to file, who she would have to call, what permits she might beg for. The odds were long. Still, for the first time in years, the work felt like more than survival. It felt like hope. Determined not to act blindly, Olivia reached out to others who might share her vision. She found an online forum for Mustang advocates and posted her story under a pseudonym, carefully omitting names and locations. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in, some skeptical, some suspicious, but many deeply supportive. People shared their own stories: wild horse rescues, legal fights, heartbreak, and hope. Several advocates sent her contact information for organizations willing to help with legal issues and fundraising. For the first time, Olivia realized she wasn't alone in her fight. One message, from a young reporter named Maya Chen, stood out. Maya wrote for a regional magazine and had covered several Mustang-related stories. "Your account is powerful," she wrote. "If you're willing, I'd love to hear more. Stories like yours could change how people see wild horses, and maybe even how the law treats them." Olivia hesitated for days before replying, worried that publicity might backfire. Still, something about Maya's persistence and honesty convinced her to open up. They arranged to meet at the local diner, a neutral ground that let Olivia gauge Maya's intentions in person. Maya turned out to be quick-witted, gentle, and genuinely passionate about animal welfare. She listened intently, scribbling in her notebook, occasionally pausing to ask sharp, thoughtful questions. "Why risk it?" Maya asked over coffee, her voice low. "Most people would have walked away." Olivia shrugged. "I didn't have a choice. Spirit asked for help. And once I saw Shadow and Nova, I couldn't turn my back on them. Not after all I've lost." Maya smiled softly, her eyes shining with understanding. "You might be able to do more than save one family. Maybe this is bigger." Emboldened by Maya's encouragement, Olivia agreed to let her share the story, anonymously at first. They brainstormed ways to raise awareness: a photo essay, interviews, a series about the daily life of wild Mustangs on the edge of survival. Maya promised to connect her with legal advocates and other sanctuaries for advice. Back on the ranch, Olivia started to think about what a Mustang sanctuary would actually require. The pastures needed new fencing, high enough to keep the Mustangs safe, but not so restrictive that they felt trapped. She'd need shelter, a supply of feed, a reliable water source. More daunting was the legal work: filings, applications, partnerships with veterinarians, and compliance with state and federal law. It was overwhelming, but Olivia made lists, filling pages with diagrams and timelines, her kitchen table cluttered with coffee-stained papers. Through it all, the Mustangs continued to come and go. Spirit's visits became routine. Sometimes he'd stand outside her fence, head high, watching her move through morning chores. Shadow, growing stronger every day, let Nova venture further, the filly bucking and running in circles, already showing hints of her father's pride. Olivia kept her distance, resisting the urge to approach, honoring their wildness even as her own attachment deepened. But doubt gnawed at her. What if she failed? What if she drew too much attention, angering neighbors or the government? At night, anxiety twisted her dreams. Visions of men with clipboards and guns, helicopters driving terrified Mustangs across the plain. The risks felt enormous, but so did the potential reward. When the stress grew too heavy, Olivia would find comfort in her new ritual, watching the Mustangs at dusk, the world painted gold, the silence broken only by Nova's playful whinnies or Spirit's deep, rolling call. Those moments steadied her, reminding her why she was willing to risk so much. A tentative peace settled over the ranch. For a while it seemed as if Olivia's dream might come true. She could see it, a future where the Sanders Ranch was a refuge for wild horses, a place where people learned to respect, not tame, the spirit of Nevada's living legends. She knew it wouldn't last forever, but for now, hope was enough. And every night, as the moon rose above the fields, Olivia whispered a promise to the wind. She would fight for Spirit, for Shadow, for Nova, and for every Mustang that called the wild home. The late winter sun had just begun to warm the land, painting the Nevada hills in soft gold. For Olivia, it felt like the first breath after months spent underwater. Spirit, Shadow, and Nova came and went from the ranch's edge, their wild beauty lifting her spirit each morning. Her plans for a sanctuary were slowly coming together. Grants being researched, petitions drafted, legal paperwork reviewed with Maya's help. Even the community, once wary, had grown quieter. There were still suspicious glances and the occasional warning, but for the first time Olivia truly believed she might make her dream real. That fragile hope shattered on a Thursday morning, with a sound Olivia would never forget. It started as a distant hum, barely audible above the wind. But as it grew louder, the horses near her barn grew restless, ears flicking, hooves stomping, nervous eyes darting to the horizon. Olivia stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the sun, and her heart plummeted. A low-flying government helicopter thundered across the valley, kicking up dust and panic. Trucks lined the county road beyond her property, men in uniforms and official vehicles milling about with clipboards and radios. The Bureau of Land Management's annual Mustang roundup had begun, and the wild peace of her ranch was about to be shattered. Olivia's chest tightened with fear and helplessness. She had read about these roundups, how helicopters chased Mustangs for miles, funneling them into traps, separating families, capturing them for holding pens or adoption. The arguments were always the same: land management, overpopulation, water resources. But for Olivia, the logic didn't matter. She saw only Spirit's family, vulnerable and free, about to be stolen away. She ran for her truck, hands shaking as she grabbed her binoculars and camera. From the ridge near her property, she watched as the chaos unfolded. The helicopter swooped low, sirens wailing, herding bands of wild horses across the valley floor. Spirit's silver mane flashed among the herd. He was running, driving Shadow and Nova ahead of him, hooves thundering, muscles rippling in panic. Olivia's eyes burned with tears. She wanted to scream, to throw herself between the Mustangs and the machines, but all she could do was watch. At the edge of the trap corral, the horses balked, confused and terrified by the fencing and crowds. The wranglers shouted, waving flags, driving the Mustangs into a tight chute. Olivia's heart broke as she saw Shadow stumble, Nova pressed tight to her side. In the confusion, Spirit tried to double back, but a truck swerved, blocking his path. He reared up, letting out a scream that echoed off the hills, a sound Olivia would never forget. Within minutes, it was over. The herd was funneled into holding pens, the dust settling over the churned-up ground. Spirit, battered and wild-eyed, managed to slip away through a break in the fence line, but Shadow and Nova were trapped, their heads hanging low, flanks heaving with exhaustion. Olivia's hands shook as she snapped photos, desperate to document what she was witnessing. As the BLM crew packed up, Olivia hurried back to her ranch, her mind racing with dread. She found Spirit at the fence, frantic, lathered with sweat, his calls ringing out over the silent land. He paced back and forth, nostrils flaring, searching for his family. Olivia's heart twisted. She had never seen such raw grief in any creature, human or animal. Spirit's agony was palpable, and Olivia felt it as if it were her own. Maya arrived just as Olivia was trying to calm the stallion. She carried her camera and her notepad, her face grim. "I got your message," Maya said. "I saw the trucks. We need to get this out there." Together they filmed Spirit's distress, his wild, aching calls, the way he pressed against the fence, staring at the empty hills. Maya's footage was raw and immediate. That night, she uploaded it to social media with a careful edit and a plea for public sympathy. This is what a Mustang family torn apart looks like. Nevada's wild horses deserve better. The video spread quickly, sparking an outpouring of support, and, inevitably, backlash from some locals who saw the roundups as necessary or blamed Olivia for interfering. Olivia spent a sleepless night at the kitchen table, her phone buzzing with messages, some full of sympathy and offers to help, others sharp with threats or anger. The fear of legal reprisal became real again. She knew she couldn't storm the holding pens or openly defy the government, not without risking everything: her ranch, her freedom, and the remaining horses. But doing nothing was no longer an option. Olivia called the Mustang legal hotline Maya had found, reaching a wildlife lawyer named Bethany Ward. Bethany listened quietly, then laid out Olivia's options. "There's risk, but there are also pathways," As a vet, you might get limited access to the holding facility, especially if you have evidence of medical distress in the captured horses. You'll need to proceed carefully, document everything, and be ready for a fight. Olivia's stomach twisted with anxiety, but her resolve hardened. She agreed to meet with Bethany and to let Maya document the process. The next morning, she drafted a formal request for a veterinary inspection of the holding pens, attaching photos of Nova's difficult birth and recent videos of her condition. She pressed send, hands shaking, and braced herself for the next round of battle. As the days passed, Spirit never left the fence. He stood sentinel, eyes always searching the horizon, calling for the family torn away from him. Olivia stood with him, promising silently that she would not give up. Not until Spirit's family was whole again, or until she had exhausted every last option. The land that had once felt safe and silent now buzzed with tension. Helicopters still thundered occasionally in the distance, and government trucks lingered like storm clouds. Olivia watched the hills, her jaw set, her heart steeled for what was to come. She would fight for the Mustangs. She would fight for Spirit, for Shadow, for Nova. The battle had only just begun. A brittle wind swept the Nevada Valley as Olivia pulled her old ranch truck onto the asphalt, Maya beside her, both women silent and tense. The government holding pens lay just a few miles out of town, surrounded by cyclone fencing and guarded by grim-faced men in tan uniforms. It looked less like a place for rehabilitation and more like a prison. Rows of frightened wild horses packed together, their breath rising in clouds over the hard-packed earth. Olivia gripped the steering wheel, jaw set, heart pounding. The paperwork she clutched was their only ticket in, an official petition for veterinary inspection, her veterinary credentials attached, and a stack of photos and legal arguments Bethany had helped her prepare. As they approached the gate, a guard raised a hand. "State your business." Olivia drew in a breath. "Olivia Sanders, licensed vet. I have a formal request for inspection. There's a filly in your custody, recent birth, possible medical distress. I'm here under the legal guidance of Bethany Ward." She handed over the forms, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crashing through her veins. The guard squinted at the paperwork, then gestured to a woman in a BLM vest, who looked them up and down. 15 minutes, she barked, "and don't touch the animals." Maya's camera was ready, discreetly running as they entered. The holding pens were worse than Olivia had imagined. Crowded, noisy, and deeply unnatural. The wildness had been pressed out of the Mustangs, their eyes dull and bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. No room to run or even turn freely. Spirit's family was nowhere in sight at first, but Olivia scanned each pen with mounting dread. Finally, near the far end, she spotted them. Shadow, rail-thin and trembling, her coat matted with mud, and Nova, smaller than ever, pressed against her mother's side. The filly's breathing was shallow, and she barely responded when Shadow nuzzled her. Olivia's clinical mind snapped into focus, overriding panic. Nova needs urgent care. She's in respiratory distress, possibly a secondary infection from exposure after a breech birth. She won't survive long in this environment. The BLM supervisor folded her arms, unimpressed. "We have protocols. If she deteriorates, she'll be separated for treatment or euthanasia." "No!" Olivia's voice cracked across the yard, echoing off the steel fencing. "I have medical records proving Nova's vulnerability and video of her traumatic birth. If you ignore her needs, you'll be liable for negligence. I demand immediate medical exemption and transfer to my facility, at least on a temporary basis, for the foal and her dam." Tension radiated through the air as other officials gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Maya filmed everything, her hands steady, capturing Olivia's desperate plea. The facts, the emotion, the fury of a woman who would not be cowed. The supervisor's face reddened. "You're pushing your luck, Miss Sanders. We're following protocol." Olivia squared her shoulders. "Protocols mean nothing if they ignore life. Look at her." She pointed to Nova, who coughed weakly, sides heaving. "She's dying. You want that on your conscience, or in tomorrow's headlines." The standoff seemed endless. The only sounds the restless stamping of horses and the whir of Maya's camera. Finally, one of the BLM veterinarians stepped forward, examining Nova through the rails. He knelt, listened to her breathing, and frowned. "She's bad off. If she dies here, it'll be trouble." After a whispered huddle, the supervisor turned to Olivia, teeth clenched. "Temporary exemption. You take responsibility for the mare and foal. If anything happens, it's on you, and you'll be under observation. Any breach, you lose everything. Understood?" Olivia nodded, tears springing to her eyes. She signed the release forms, heart racing, then hurried into the pen. Shadow whickered softly at her approach, and Nova, weak but alive, let Olivia lift her into a blanket, her tiny head resting against Olivia's chest. Shadow followed, guided by quiet words and the trust that had grown in the Nevada night. As they left the pen, Maya filmed every moment, the exhausted joy on Olivia's face, the raw hope etched into every trembling movement. The BLM staff watched with tight jaws and cold eyes, and Olivia knew she'd made as many enemies as friends today. But Nova was alive, and Shadow was safe, and Spirit's calls might soon be answered. On the drive back, Nova curled in the back seat, wrapped in Olivia's jacket. Shadow's head pressed against the rear window, eyes wide with confusion, but slowly relaxing. Maya sat up front, reviewing her footage, voice trembling with adrenaline. "They'll come after you for this." Olivia managed a small smile. "Let them. We have the law, the footage, and the truth. That's all I need." Back at the ranch, Olivia set to work. She turned her living room into an emergency stall, laying down straw, running a space heater, and monitoring Nova's vitals through the night. Shadow stayed close, watching Olivia's every move, her trust deepening with each gentle touch. When Spirit appeared at dawn, pacing the fence, Olivia opened the gate, holding her breath. Shadow called softly, and Spirit answered, his joy unmistakable. He stepped into the yard, touching noses with his mate, then nuzzling Nova. For the first time since the roundup, the family was whole, yet the celebration was shadowed by new fears. Olivia knew the BLM would watch her closely. One misstep, and all she'd gained could be lost. The ranch felt like a battleground. Supporters drove by to offer food and supplies, but there were also angry calls and threats, accusations of lawbreaking and interference. Maya's footage spread quickly, drawing the eyes of Mustang advocates nationwide, but also painting a target on Olivia's back. Still, as she watched Spirit and Shadow nuzzle their daughter under the pale Nevada sunrise, Olivia felt a sense of peace. She had done the impossible, risking everything to save a wild family. The cost would be high, but for now, hope outweighed fear. She promised herself, and the Mustangs, that she would fight for their future, no matter how fierce the storm ahead. The Nevada sky was streaked with bruised clouds as Olivia stood at the edge of her property, hands buried in her jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every muscle in her body was tense. The ranch, once a place of quiet routine, now pulsed with a restless energy. Volunteers unloading hay, reporters in dust-coated SUVs idling by the fence, and officials making their presence known with clipboards and cold stares. Maya's video of Spirit's haunting calls and Olivia's standoff at the holding pens had exploded online, drawing attention from every corner of the country. Overnight, Olivia became a lightning rod for public opinion. Mustang advocacy groups flooded her inbox with support, offering donations and legal aid. Local news vans jockeyed for a glimpse of Nova, the little filly who had survived the odds. National animal welfare organizations called, promising lawyers and press coverage. The sanctuary dream was suddenly real, but the spotlight was as fierce as it was unpredictable. With the world watching, the government didn't back down. BLM agents and county officials showed up unannounced, inspecting every inch of her property. They combed through her barn, photographed the makeshift medical area she'd set up in her living room, and checked her permits and paperwork. One afternoon, a sheriff's deputy handed Olivia a notice. The ranch would be subject to weekly inspections until further notice. Any sign of non-compliance, improper fencing, unsanitary conditions, horses escaping, would be grounds for immediate seizure of the animals and steep fines. Olivia's stomach twisted with anxiety, but she refused to be intimidated. She made lists of every legal requirement: sanctuary status filings, animal welfare standards, local zoning laws, and tackled them one by one, always with Maya and Bethany's support. Bethany, the wildlife lawyer, worked pro bono, filing motions, responding to every legal threat, and training Olivia to document everything. "If they're going to watch you, watch them back," Bethany said. "Keep records, record conversations, and don't let them catch you off guard." Her phone never stopped ringing. Some calls were heartening: local teachers asking if their classes could visit, ranchers offering to donate supplies, children mailing hand-drawn pictures of wild horses with letters that said, "Thank you, Miss Olivia." But there were also threats. Anonymous voices on the line, accusing her of destroying tradition, breaking the law, endangering the valley's way of life. Sometimes she'd wake in the night to headlights on her driveway, trucks revving engines before speeding off. She slept lightly, a shotgun by her bed, determined never to let fear dictate her actions. Amid the chaos, Spirit, Shadow, and Nova became the heart of the ranch. Each morning, Spirit stood sentinel at the gate, eyes bright, body strong. Nova, gaining strength every day, followed Shadow with newfound confidence, racing up and down the fence line, her black tail flicking in the wind. Olivia documented their recovery, photos, videos, daily logs, sending updates to supporters and legal allies. The public watched eagerly, and the story became a rallying cry. If one woman could stand up to the system, maybe the wild could survive after all. Yet not everyone celebrated. A few neighbors, frustrated by the attention and traffic, petitioned the county to revoke Olivia's business license. They complained about the increased media presence, potential disease from wild horses, and the precedent it might set for others. County hearings were scheduled, tense meetings where voices rose and tempers flared. Olivia sat through them all, never wavering, answering every question with calm determination. One evening, Bethany called with urgent news. "The county is considering an emergency ordinance banning private wild horse sanctuaries," she said. "They'll try to use your case to set an example. We need to rally support, letters, calls, local media, and you'll need to testify at the next hearing." The prospect of public testimony terrified Olivia. She spent sleepless nights rehearsing her words, fearing she'd break down or say the wrong thing. But when the day arrived, she walked into the county courthouse in boots and a pressed flannel shirt, chin high, heart steady. Maya was there, camera rolling, and the benches were packed with supporters, Mustang advocates, ranchers, teachers, and children holding homemade signs. When Olivia took the stand, she spoke plainly. She described the night Spirit came to her door, the desperate rescue in the snow, and the bond that had grown between woman and wild horse. She spoke of law, compassion, and the duty to protect Nevada's living history. "I don't claim to be a hero," she finished, voice unwavering. I just couldn't turn my back on suffering when I saw it. If that's a crime, then maybe the law needs to change. The hearing lasted hours. Supporters and opponents spoke in turn. When the county commissioners finally voted, the room held its breath. By a narrow margin, Olivia won provisional sanctuary status, permission to keep Spirit, Shadow, Nova, and several other rescued Mustangs on her property, while her application for permanent status was reviewed. It was a victory, but a fragile one. The battle lines were clear. Olivia poured every cent she had into upgrading her facilities: better fencing, improved shelters, and sanitary medical stalls. Volunteers showed up daily, swinging hammers, painting signs, running social media campaigns. Mustang organizations sent legal teams and donations. School children came to visit, their laughter and wide eyes bringing hope and energy to the ranch. Spirit, Shadow, and Nova thrived under the watchful eyes of the world. The Mustangs became more than symbols. They were ambassadors for every wild thing fighting to survive against the odds. Olivia, battered but unbowed, led the charge, determined to prove that heart, law, and community could change even the most stubborn minds. And as dusk settled over Whispering Meadows, Olivia stood in the golden light, watching Nova chase fireflies in the paddock. She felt the future hanging in the balance, uncertain but filled with possibility. The fight was far from over, but for the first time hope felt stronger than fear. Spring's arrival in Nevada came with a riot of color, as wildflowers burst through the thawing earth and the air grew thick with the songs of meadowlarks. Olivia, once accustomed to solitary days and heavy silences, found her world transformed. Whispering Meadows had become a hub of activity. Volunteers, neighbors, and curious visitors streamed through her gate almost every day. What started as a desperate late-night rescue had blossomed into a cause, and now a community. Olivia poured every ounce of herself into building a real sanctuary. The provisional status granted by the county was a fragile win, but it spurred her to action. She used her savings, supplemented by donations from supporters around the country, to improve the ranch. Crews erected high, sturdy fencing along the borders, carefully designed to keep the Mustangs safe without making them feel caged. Old barns were cleaned out and converted into weatherproof shelters. Olivia worked long days, hammer in hand, sweat stinging her eyes, refusing to let exhaustion or self-doubt take root. Each improvement was a victory. Olivia took pride in every freshly painted board, every new shelter that went up, every field cleared of debris. With the help of local tradespeople and volunteers, some seasoned ranch hands, some students with more enthusiasm than experience, she created a space that was not only safe, but welcoming. Pastures rolled in every direction, dotted with trees and natural streams, giving Spirit, Shadow, Nova, and the growing herd the freedom to roam. Every evening, Olivia would watch the Mustangs, marveling at their grace and resilience. It was a daily reminder of why she fought so hard. Science and advocacy became cornerstones of the sanctuary's mission. Olivia reached out to equine researchers and behaviorists from the state university, inviting them to study Mustang intelligence, social structures, and communication. Spirit and Nova, with their story already in the national spotlight, became stars of the project. Scientists documented their subtle vocalizations, the complex ways they signaled to each other, and the deep bonds that held their family together. Olivia herself became a student again, soaking up new knowledge at every turn. She learned how to interpret Spirit's body language, when a flick of his ear or a toss of his mane meant curiosity, warning, or affection. She worked closely with veterinarians, ensuring every horse received proper care. No detail was too small. Hoof care, dietary needs, enrichment activities. Nova, once so fragile, grew into a lively, curious filly, often leading games with younger arrivals. Shadow regained her strength, her coat glossy, her movements confident. Maya, ever the tireless advocate, helped Olivia share the story of Whispering Meadows far and wide. They organized school visits, opening the sanctuary's gates to classes of children eager to learn about wild horses. Teachers and parents watched in awe as Spirit allowed the bravest kids to approach the fence, nostrils flaring as he accepted apples and gentle pats. Public events, press tours, educational workshops, Mustang art contests brought a sense of celebration to the ranch, turning it into a symbol of hope. Word spread quickly. Local officials who had once threatened to shut her down now found themselves attending open houses, posing for photos, and shaking hands with donors. Olivia made sure they saw every improvement, kept meticulous records, and invited animal welfare officers for regular, transparent inspections. With each visit, confidence in the sanctuary's standards grew. Still, there were challenges. The scrutiny never truly faded. Opponents in the community continued to watch for mistakes, and Olivia sometimes felt the weight of their eyes on her back. She responded by working even harder, always above board, always ready for questions. She hosted regular public meetings, answering concerns, inviting neighbors to tour the ranch. Some minds changed slowly, others not at all, but the tide was turning. The sanctuary's programs expanded rapidly. Olivia collaborated with educators and scientists to develop Mustang-focused curriculum and youth conservation camps. Older students interned on the ranch, learning animal care, ranch management, and advocacy skills. Researchers published papers highlighting the Mustang's cognitive abilities, strengthening the argument for their protection on a national level. Whispering Meadows became a model for other ranchers and aspiring sanctuary owners, a place where people from all walks of life came together to learn, help, and witness the miracle of second chances. Olivia's confidence grew alongside her herd. She discovered a knack for public speaking, delivering passionate talks at local events and wild horse conferences. Her message was always the same: empathy, science, and community could drive real change. She reminded her audiences that wild horses were more than symbols. They were sentient beings deserving of respect, protection, and understanding. Through it all, Spirit remained her silent partner and sentinel. Some evenings, when the work was done and the last visitors had left, Olivia would walk to the far paddock, where Spirit watched over the herd. He'd come to her quietly, allowing her to rest a gentle hand on his neck, the boundary between wild and human blurring in the twilight. Those moments reminded Olivia of how far she'd come, from a desperate night in a snowstorm to the heart of a living, thriving sanctuary. By the end of the season, Whispering Meadows had gained official recognition from the county as a model of humane Mustang care and conservation. Grants followed, along with offers to host researchers, conservationists, and even artists in residence. Olivia, once haunted by loss and self-doubt, now mentored others, helping them avoid the pitfalls she'd faced and inspiring them to fight for something greater than themselves. The ranch was no longer just her inheritance. It was a legacy in the making, a beacon for wild horses and the people who loved them. And as summer dawned, Olivia stood at the center of it all, ready for whatever the future might bring. By late summer, Whispering Meadows had become something extraordinary. More than a sanctuary, it was a beacon. Olivia rarely found time for rest anymore, but she cherished the quiet moments when she could look out over the rolling fields and see Spirit Shadow, Nova, and a dozen other Mustangs grazing in peace. The ranch pulsed with life and learning. Kids in dusty boots tending to chores. Researchers hunched over notebooks. Volunteers stacking hay. Visitors snapping photos. Olivia knew that every hoofprint in the soil was proof of something hard-won, something worth fighting for. But it was the nights, still, starlit, heavy with cricket song, that made Olivia most reflective. She'd sit on the porch, mug in hand, and let her mind drift back over the path that had led her here. It felt both impossibly long and startlingly short. One desperate act of compassion on a freezing night, and suddenly her world had changed forever. She thought often about what it meant to cross lines, to step outside comfort, law, even reason, in the name of empathy. When she'd found Shadow in distress and Spirit begging for help, Olivia had moved on instinct and heart. If she'd paused to consider the consequences, legal risk, social backlash, even the threat of losing her ranch, would she have acted so boldly? She honestly didn't know. But the lesson, she realized, wasn't about reckless heroism. It was about seeing suffering and refusing to turn away, even when everything safe and familiar told her not to get involved. Whispering Meadows had forced Olivia to become a leader, though she'd never thought of herself that way before. She'd been the outsider, the quiet one, the daughter who left veterinary school and never quite fit the mold. But fighting for the Mustangs, first in silence, then in the glaring light of public scrutiny, had changed her. She'd learned to speak up, to marshal resources, to make herself visible even when it felt like exposure, in county hearings, at legal depositions. In interviews with reporters and school kids, Olivia found her voice. And in doing so, she realized leadership didn't always mean charging ahead or standing alone. It meant listening, adapting, and bringing others along on the journey. That fall, Olivia received an invitation she could hardly believe, to give the keynote speech at the National Wild Horse Conference in Reno. At first, she balked. Public speaking still filled her with dread, and the stakes felt impossibly high. But Maya, now both a close friend and trusted advisor, encouraged her. "Your story matters, Liv. If you don't share it, who will?" Olivia wrote her speech late at night, surrounded by photos of Spirit and Nova, her hands trembling over the keys. When the day came, she stood at the podium in a borrowed blazer, the conference room filled with conservationists, scientists, ranchers, lawmakers, and journalists. For a moment, the words caught in her throat. But then she remembered the cold desperation in Spirit's eyes, the weight of Nova's tiny, struggling body, and all fear fell away. She spoke honestly, telling the audience about the choices she'd made and the prices she'd paid. She described the tension between law and empathy, the way regulations intended to protect sometimes became obstacles to real care. She admitted her mistakes and doubts, but insisted on the importance of compassion in every decision. "Empathy isn't weakness," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's the beginning of every meaningful change. But compassion alone isn't enough. We need law, yes, but we need laws that understand the living beings they're meant to protect. And we need communities willing to stand with the voiceless, even when it's inconvenient." The room was silent as Olivia told the story of Spirit's plea, Shadow's peril, Nova's birth, and the countless small battles that followed. Legal threats, angry neighbors, sleepless nights, and impossible hope. She spoke of how her own view of leadership had changed, how true strength lay in building coalitions, forging alliances, and helping others find their own courage. "Every one of us can make a difference," she concluded. "Sometimes all it takes is the willingness to say, 'Not on my watch.'" Her words rippled outward. After her talk, dozens of people approached her. Ranchers with their own wild horse troubles, lawyers eager to help, students inspired by Nova's resilience, lawmakers rethinking outdated regulations. Advocacy organizations launched new campaigns, citing Olivia's story as proof that change was possible. Even the BLM invited her to consult on Mustang management, offering cautious cooperation. Back at Whispering Meadows, the lessons Olivia had learned became part of daily life. She encouraged her staff and volunteers to think critically, to push for both heart and strategy. She developed training programs for other sanctuary founders, stressing the need for legal knowledge and coalition building alongside compassion. Olivia shared her story with youth groups and civic clubs, hoping to inspire the next generation of advocates. Most evenings, she walked the fence line at sunset, watching Spirit and his herd against the glowing sky. She knew the fight wasn't over. Mustangs across the West still faced roundups, neglect, and shrinking land. But she believed now, more than ever, that ordinary people could spark extraordinary change. Olivia's journey taught her that meaningful progress demanded more than just good intentions. It required courage, persistence, and a willingness to challenge broken systems. And it required empathy, a radical, practical empathy that could bridge divides and remake the law itself. As she looked out over Whispering Meadows, Olivia realized that the legacy she was building wasn't just for the horses. It was for everyone who'd ever wondered if one voice could make a difference. Her answer, forged in the wild Nevada night and tested in fire, was yes. Years passed, but the memory of that desperate winter night, when a wild stallion shattered Olivia's solitude, never faded from her heart. Whispering Meadows transformed as the seasons rolled by, each year adding layers of growth, challenge, and triumph. The once quiet ranch became a living testament to what courage and empathy could build, even in the harshest of places. Spirit, now graying around the muzzle, ruled the sanctuary with gentle authority. His mane, once wild and tangled, gleamed silver in the Nevada sun. He watched over the growing herd from the hilltop, his once fierce eyes softened by age and wisdom. Nova, the foal who had nearly died in a snowbank, had become a powerful, striking mare. Her coat shimmered like starlight, and her spirit, unyielding, curious, joyful, embodied the hope and freedom Olivia fought for. Shadow, too, aged gracefully. Her bond with Spirit and Nova remained unbreakable. Every year, new generations of Mustangs were born at Whispering Meadows, each foal a living reminder of the night when Olivia first answered the wild's call. Some horses found new homes through carefully managed adoptions. Most remained, forming intricate social structures and passing down their instincts and stories in the language of snorts, whinnies, and thunderous gallops. Olivia herself changed. She was no longer the lonely rancher wrestling with grief and regret. Her hair, streaked with silver, was usually pulled back beneath a worn hat. Her laughter came easier now, deep and contagious, and her eyes carried both the weight and the sparkle of a life fully lived. Maya remained by her side, friend, chronicler, and partner in advocacy. Together they built Whispering Meadows into more than a sanctuary. It was a movement, a teaching ground, and a beacon for the wild. The programs Olivia dreamed of blossomed into reality. High school and college interns from across the country came each summer, eager to study the Mustangs and contribute to their care. The ranch's research partnerships deepened. University fellows conducted long-term studies on wild horse behavior, social bonds, and communication, sharing findings at international conferences and in academic journals. Conservation groups launched annual youth camps, teaching children about ecology, advocacy, and the art of listening to nature. Whispering Meadows' influence rippled outward. Visiting scientists and educators took Olivia's practical models for Mustang care back to their own states. Families returned year after year for public events: the Spring Roundup, Wild Horse Awareness Week, and the much-anticipated Mustang Festival. Each festival, Spirit led the herd's grand procession, Nova close behind, as the community celebrated with music, food, and stories under the open sky. Local artisans sold painted horseshoes and woven blankets. Children paraded with cardboard horse masks, laughter ringing across the hills. For Olivia, the greatest reward came not in headlines or awards, but in quiet, everyday victories. A rescued filly finding her first patch of wildflowers, a volunteer learning to trust a wary stallion, a group of children growing silent in awe as a Mustang herd galloped past the fence at dusk. Each of these moments felt like a promise kept, not just to Spirit and his family, but to her own younger self, the girl who once dreamed in the language of horses and wild wind. In her later years, Olivia was often invited to speak across the country, at schools, conferences, legislative hearings. Her message never changed. True leadership is the courage to stand with the voiceless and turn empathy into action. She told audiences how one wild stallion's plea had changed the course of her life, urging them to listen for the calls, loud or quiet, that might one day ask for their help. "It isn't about saving the world all at once," she'd say, smiling. "It's about doing the next right thing, and then the next, until you've built something worth leaving behind." Maya's reporting continued, now as a celebrated author and filmmaker. Her documentaries, filled with sweeping shots of Whispering Meadows and candid moments between Olivia and the Mustangs, inspired thousands to volunteer, donate, and advocate for wild horses. Their story became a case study in universities, a children's book, even a beloved classroom play in rural schools across Nevada and beyond. The local community's transformation surprised even Olivia. Some of her fiercest early critics became her most loyal supporters, volunteering at events or leading tours for newcomers. Whispering Meadows became a source of pride, a place families brought visitors, a setting for weddings and reunions, a living reminder that change was possible when a community chose courage over comfort. Not every battle was won. There were still government roundups, still threats to public lands, still nights when Olivia's dreams were haunted by the sound of helicopters and scattered herds. But she never doubted the worth of her fight. Each victory, no matter how small, was another stitch in the tapestry of progress. And in every hardship, she saw a lesson that made her and her sanctuary stronger. As time passed, Olivia found herself mentoring a new generation of advocates and sanctuary owners. She shared the legal strategies, the mistakes, and the triumphs, always insisting that empathy and perseverance were the real foundations of success. Her former students and interns now ran their own programs, citing Whispering Meadows as the inspiration for their courage. On the 10th anniversary of Spirit's arrival, the Mustang Festival swelled to its biggest crowd yet. Olivia stood with Maya at the crest of the hill, watching families picnic in the wildflower fields and children run barefoot after foals. As the sun set, painting the land in molten gold, Spirit and Nova led the herd in one last run across the pasture. A thunder of hooves, a blur of manes, the song of the wild echoing out to the horizon. In that golden hour, Olivia felt a sense of peace she'd never known before. She turned to Maya, her voice quiet but certain. "All this, it started with a single plea for help. Look what we built, just by listening and daring to try." And as darkness settled over Whispering Meadows, Olivia knew her story and spirits would ripple out for generations, teaching others to stand for the voiceless and transform empathy into action. Their legacy wasn't just in the horses that ran free, but in the hearts they'd changed and the wild hope that would never be tamed.